for me. Good afternoon. I am Latricia Davis, the Ackerman Family Director of Education at the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum. I want to thank you for joining us for our 2025 Summer Survivor Speaker Series. Today, you will hear from Holocaust survivor Hanna Schrob, who will share her story of arrest and deportation to Westerbork Transit Camp, transfer to other camps, and liberation by the U.S. Army in France in late 1944. Before we begin, I would like to thank our community partners for the Summer Survivor Speaker Series, the Anti-Defamation League of Texoma, the Dallas After School, Green Hills School, Jewish Federation of Greater Dallas, the Southwest Jewish Congress, the Texas Holocaust, Genocide, and Anti-Semitism Advisory Commission, and the Legacy Senior Communities. We are grateful for your continued support of the museum and our programs. I would also like to extend a special welcome to our board members, generations, and volunteers in our audience today. We could not fulfill our mission without you, and if you are interested in becoming a member or a volunteer of the museum, please visit our website at dhhrm.org to learn more. In just one moment, Hanna will share her story with you, and then you will have time for questions and answers. If you are joining us in person today, you can use the card provided to you at check-in to write your question. Our staff will come around at the end of the program to collect your cards. If you are joining us virtually, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to type out and submit your questions. I now ask you to silence your cell phones so that we may all listen to Hanna's presentation without disruptions. Please also refrain from recording the presentation. We will post a recording of this talk on our YouTube channel in the coming days. It is now my pleasure to turn things over to Hanna Schrob.
Thank you. Shalom, everyone, and thank you for allowing me to tell you some of my story. I am one of the lucky ones. My immediate family of 6 survived the war. I was not quite 7 years old when the Gestapo, which is the German police, knocked on our door and removed us from our home. My name is Hanna Spielman. I was born in Maastricht, Holland, on July 5th, 1936. My parents were Helen and Alexander Spielman. I had 3 siblings. Bernard was the oldest and was born in Essen, Germany. Nathan, myself, and Edith were born in Maastricht. My mother was born in New York City to German immigrants. When she was 3 years old, her parents decided to return to Europe because they could not adjust to living in America. My father was born in Poland on September 15, 1905. He was an optician and founded the International Optical Syndicate and was quite a successful businessman. My father was on a business trip to Essen, Germany, when he met my mother. At that time, she was working at her brother's factory as a seamstress when she was introduced to my father, and they quickly fell in love. They were married in 1932. A year later, my mother gave birth to their first child, Bernard. This was at the same time that Hitler became Chancellor of Germany in 1933, just a year after my parents were married. Life became very difficult for Jewish people in Germany. Jewish businesses were closed, banks were closed, children no longer could go to school, and all professionals no longer could practice in their fields. Along with my aunt and uncle, my parents saw the danger and decided to move across the German border to Maastricht, Holland, where they believed they would be safe. Here in Maastricht, I and 2 more siblings were born. Because of the change in American citizenship laws at the time, Nathan and I were granted American citizenship at birth, and that was due to my mother's citizenship. This law only existed for 6 years. My 2 other siblings had to be naturalized when they came to the States. Our life in Maastricht was very normal and very happy. My father had a successful eyeglass import business, and we lived in a beautiful home. In 1940, Hitler conquered Holland. We no longer were allowed to be outdoors with the Jewish, and we had to wear a Jewish star sewn to our clothing. We were no longer allowed to have cars, telephones, and children were not allowed to attend schools, and life became very restricted. The only way to continue the education of Jewish children was privately by Jewish teachers. During an air raid, the bombs and sirens were in the background when my mother went into labor to give birth to her 4th child. At the hospital, nurses and doctors were frantically getting other patients down to the basement, leaving my mother all alone to deliver her baby girl. As danger continued to loom throughout Europe, my aunts and uncles decided to leave and were able to sail to the United States. Before they departing, they tried to convince my parents to leave with them. At that time, my father was a disbeliever and didn't think Hitler would come into Holland. As time went on, things got dramatically worse, so my parents finally decided to try and flee Europe in late 1942. My family packed up our belongings into crates and readied to get on a ship destined for America. Unfortunately, it was too late, and the Germans would not allow the ship to leave the port of Holland. During this time, people all over Europe would take great risks to help Jewish people in whatever way they could by offering food, shelter, information, and continuing education for children. However, there were many people who could not be trusted, who would turn in Jews if given a chance because they were afraid and hoped to gain benefits from the Nazis. A generous neighbor offered to store the valuables that our family had created for departure. During the night, these crates were transported over the roofs of their houses so that nobody could see what we were doing. Because the neighbors were Gentiles or non-Jews, they had no reason to believe that they could help, but had promised my parents that they could recover their belongings after the war if they survived. If not for their courageous help, we would not have been able to recover any of our valuable possessions. 6 weeks after the birth of my sister Edie, the Nazis knocked on our door and took us away. We found out that the town's mayor denounced my family to the Germans. Denouncing meant that the Maastricht mayor told the Nazis my family were Jews. Off to a living hell went 2 adults, 3 children, an infant, and just a few suitcases. We were forced to quickly decide what we should pack in the few suitcases they allowed: diapers, clothing, items for survival. The Nazis pushed us onto a truck and we were taken to a jail where we slept on hay on the floor. My mother stayed up all night beating off the rats that were running around in our jail. After a few days in jail, we were transported to Westerbork to face possible extermination. The purpose of Westerbork Transit Camp was to temporarily hold Jews awaiting deportation to any of the death camps in the East. Each time we were scheduled for transport to a death camp, the trains were so full that we could not board. We were told to return to our barracks and wait for the next transport. In Westerbork, conditions were substandard for adults and worse for an infant. Food was scarce, and as a result, my mother could no longer nurse the baby, making her survival even more questionable. We were housed in barracks, and I remember having to sleep on my sister's diapers in order to dry them out. And then things got dramatically worse when, after 6 months in Westerbork, my father was separated from us. My mother and her 4 children were transported to Liebenau, an internment camp in Germany. This camp held those in Europe with foreign citizenship like American, French, and British. As we left my father behind, I recall my mother saying that most likely we will never see him again. From Liebenau, we were taken to Vittel, another internment camp in France. Vittel was in the mountains and was a spa town before the war. After the fall of France in 1940, the Nazis used it as a collection point for foreign nationals, including British and North and South Americans, as well as Jews holding sealed foreign passports. Officials in the Gestapo sought throughout the war to use these prisoners in exchange for German nationals held by Allied nations. However, in April 1944, as the war turned against Germany, orders were issued to arrest and deport stateless Jews and those holding papers from countries occupied by Germany. Jews holding papers from belligerent countries were also arrested and interned in France. On April 9, 1944, 137 Jews in Vittel were assembled and transported to Drancy, a transit camp with a similar purpose like Westerbork, and then to Auschwitz, where they were murdered. Vittel was liberated on September 9, 1944. One of my most terrifying memories of Vittel involves a baby carriage someone had given my mother, an old, beat-up carriage. One day, Mother suggested I take the baby for a walk. While on our walk, there was an air raid. Planes were flying and bombs were exploding. I was on a rubble-covered street and rushing to get back to my mother when the carriage tipped over and Edie rolled out. I scooped her up into my arms as fast as I could, turned the carriage around, and pulled it all the way back to where we were housed. Without a second to spare, we reached the door where they pulled us in just as they were locking the doors. I can still see that whole thing as it happened yesterday. After almost 2 years of not seeing my father, we witnessed a miracle. At the end of a long line of people emerging from a transport to Vittel, we stared in disbelief as my father appeared at the end of the line helping a blind man. When my mother saw him, she literally passed out. It was a beautiful sight when the American jeeps and tanks started rolling into the town and liberated the camp. I remember an American soldier came over to the fence and gave me some carrots and my first piece of American white bread. I went running to my mother to show her, "Look what I have for Edie," because her existence was more important than anything else. When Americans were liberating us, a soldier from General Patton's Third Army, Eldon Nicholas of Cadillac, Michigan, took it upon himself to entertain children at the fence with a toy puppet. This is a picture of him and his puppet that he used to entertain us. I am going to play this video that was captured by the humanitarian organization that includes the puppet show and my family. That is my mother, and that's my sister, baby sister Edie. And that is me on the left hand. And here you see Edie again at the fence. From Vittel, the Americans sent us to La Bourboule in France, placed us in a hotel, deloused us, and oriented us to life as free people. My mother's American citizenship was instrumental in getting us passage on the Thomas H. Barry battleship for our new lives in America. While on board, a few of us were given the chance to meet and talk with wounded soldiers returning home. In spite of their severe wounds, all put on smiles on their faces when we walked in. It made us feel so good that we could give them a little pleasure. The journey to the States took very long since the war was still going on. The captain told us we had to avoid running into any German submarines, and so he had to take a very long route to get us to the States. Upon arrival in Boston, we were greeted by the American Red Cross. We were served with the most delicious donuts and hot chocolate. They were so good, and I still have a great fondness for them, as you can see. We were then placed on a train headed for New York City, where we had a very emotional reunion with my mother's family. It was December 24th, 1944, New Year's Eve, Christmas Eve, and the city was bright with holiday lights. We had heard stories that America was paved in gold, but this was more spectacular than anything we had imagined. At first, our family was separated to live with different relatives. Later, we were reunited into our own home in Orange, New Jersey. We had some difficult adjustments to make. First, we had to learn how to speak English. My father sat us around the kitchen table and told us English is the spoken language in the U.S., and he wanted only English spoken from now on. And we were all fluent within 6 months. I also had to learn that when a plane flew over the house, I no longer had to crawl under the bed. It took quite a while to get over that fear. And then I started school. That was a new experience, for I never had any formal education. I was placed in kindergarten for about a month, then into grade 1, and then they kept promoting me until I was in the right grade for my age. Although things were normal as I grew up, I realized that the war had its impact on my father. He had been very successful in Europe, but the business he had before the war did not fare well for him in the United States. It was a struggle, somehow we managed. Just a little story for you. One of my biggest concerns was for my baby sister, Edie. She was so malnourished that her survival was unclear. My parents took her to several doctors, and one of them recommended they feed her bacon. Even though my parents were Orthodox Jews, which forbid the consumption of pork, they bought a plate, fork, knife, and a pan just to make her bacon. And the house smelled so good, but they wouldn't let me have any. She responded well, and she is still living a good life in Florida. After high school, I met and married Herb Schrob, and that was the beginning of a very exciting life for me. He showed me the world, and that helped me to develop the self-esteem that I never had. We were blessed with 4 beautiful children, Michelle, Amy, David, and Alan. On our 10th anniversary, we had the opportunity to move overseas with 3 children to Breda, Holland, where Herb was to oversee the construction of a new plastic factory being built by his boss, Joe Foster of Foster Grant. It was ironic that after 25 years, I was back in Holland. And I have to tell you, my parents were very upset that we were going back to Holland, and my mother called and she said, "Why would you want to go back? You know what it was like." And I said, "Mom, it's 25 years later, and things have changed." And then my husband got a call from my Uncle Henry, who said, "Herb, don't go. I'll make you a millionaire." And Herb said, "No, we're going." In our stay, we discovered that about 100 Jewish people had remained in Breda after the war. Since the synagogue had been destroyed in the war, they had no place to gather or to worship and were trying to reestablish their temple. Unfortunately, the Dutch government could not subsidize nor pay for the project. On one of our visits back to the U.S., Herb and I met with our rabbi to see if there were any foundations that might help to rebuild the temple that was lost. Unfortunately, no such funds were available. When Herb's boss, Joe Foster, got word of what we were trying to do, he called Herb into his office and succeeded to tell him that he would fund all the money. And that's a picture of my husband on the right holding a Torah when they dedicated the new synagogue. This was one of the highlights of our life. It meant so much to us to help those Dutch Jews have a place to pray and to keep their Jewish community together. Fortunately, we were able to attend the dedication of Beth Foster Temple. All the dignitaries of the city of Breda were there to welcome the new Jewish community. I could go on and on telling you many more stories, but time is limited, so I will close. Thank you for allowing me to share my story with you today. I have lived a very full and exciting life. I have traveled to many countries and came to the realization that America is the best country in the world, and I am so proud to be an American. I would like to tell you one more story. When I was in 5th grade, I was constantly bullied by one of the boys in the school. He often told me, "Dirty Jew, why don't you go back to where you came from?" It finally came to a head when he followed me home, knocked me to the ground, and started to beat me up. I still cringe about that. So I usually tell boys and girls and adults that if you see somebody being bullied, report it. Don't let that person get away with it. Over the years, I have experienced anti-Semitism, for many times, but not to the extent that it is happening here in America today. It is so sad that we have to fear going to the synagogue to worship and to endure hatred and violence all over again. I recently read an article that I would like to read to you. It explains what is anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism has been a part of America, the American experience, since the first Jews landed in New York City 370 years ago. In 2023, anti-Semitic incidents of assault, harassment, and vandalism surged a record 140%. Nearly 8,900 acts of hate, 24 per day, were perpetrated against members of the Jewish community, more in the last 3 years combined. Anti-Semitism declined in the U.S. from the mid-60s and the mid-90s, and it really flattened out from the end of the 20th century until 2016. Then it started to rise again because the rhetoric during and after the election included attacks on immigrants and Muslims and eventually Jews. It may not have started with the Jews, but it always is going to hit the Jews, especially because of the replacement theory. Then we saw Charlottesville in 2017, Pittsburgh in 2018, and Poway shooting a year later. I think we are actually living through the high tide of American anti-Semitism now, and the future historians will have to rename the earlier era. It seems that we are in a moment in America, Jews feel under siege in the same way they did in the 1920s and the early 50s, through the early 50s. I don't believe that history repeats itself, but I know it informs our understanding of the present. It's crucial to understand the longevity of anti-Semitism in the U.S. It's different than anti-Semitism in Europe, which took the form of genocide. But that doesn't mean that anti-Semitism that occurred in America starting in 1654, when Governor Peter Stuyvesant tried to expel the first 23 Jews from New Amsterdam. It has actually been very consequential, as we're seeing now. This is where history is important. Most people don't know that for 91 weeks, Henry Ford published a series of articles decrying the Jews in his newspaper, the Dearborn Independent. They don't understand that the way some on the far right decry George Soros from manipulating the world is the same way that the Rothschilds were decried for manipulating the world. If you don't understand anti-Semitism in the past, how can you possibly understand that people are using it exactly in the same way? I am optimistic. I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that we can do what needs to be done to tamp down on the acceptability of anti-Semitism from virtually every sector of American life. That's what happened in the 40s and 50s. There were social and cultural forces at work that made anti-Semitism unacceptable. It wasn't only the Holocaust. People worked, organizations worked, authors worked to make anti-Semitism a cause. We need to do that again. And it needs to happen at the very top of our society, from leaders in government, industry, and higher education. They need to set the tone, and my hope is that it will filter down. All of us are the future of this country, and it will be up to us to make sure that all peoples are able to live in freedom and enjoy this beautiful country. Let us do away with anti-Semitism and hatred of all people that now exist in our country. May God bless you and the United States of America. I want to thank the Holocaust Museum for keeping alive what happened during World War II and the Jewish people. It is so important to make people aware and to prevent history from repeating itself. I also want to give thanks to my family that are here today. I cannot tell you how very, very happy you have made me. You are all very special, and I love you all very, very much. I'd like to give a special thanks to my sister, if you will stand up and let us see you. I really am so pleased that she was able to join us today. We are the only living survivors left of our family. I love you very, very much. Thank you all for being here today. Thank you. Thank you. Giving me chills.
First, I want to say thank you, Hannah, for sharing your story. We are now going to open it up for questions for Q&A. So please take this moment to, if you have a question, to write it down on your note card and to raise that note card in the air. We have staff coming around to collect those. And again, if you're online, please put those in the Q&A box. I have a few to get us started. So here we go. Our first question comes with, when did you begin talking about or speaking about the Holocaust, and why did you decide to talk?
I believe it's when I lived in Virginia Beach, and the Norfolk Holocaust Society had found out I was a Holocaust survivor and invited me to join them. And through them, they had us speak in several schools and a couple of the universities. I never spoke to any of this to my family. The Holocaust Museum in Norfolk published a book called To Life, and they interviewed all the Holocaust survivors in the area and had the book printed. I brought that book one day to our gathering for Thanksgiving in Plano, Texas, where all my family was present. And I asked them if I could read that story after we had dinner. And of course they said, "Oh, sure, go ahead, Mom." So I read them the story, and afterwards, I will never forget, my granddaughter, Danielle, came over to me and said, "Grandma, I had no idea that you went through that." And from that day on, I really started to realize how important it was for me to talk about my past, and the museum here has certainly helped me to do that. I have participated in many talks at different schools, here at the museum, at a couple of companies, and whenever they call and say, "We have another appointment for you," I said, "Okay." So as long as I can, I will continue to do that.
Hannah, out of curiosity, what kept you, or why did you decide not to share your story with your family earlier?
It was an unspoken event in my family. My parents never spoke about it. And I guess that was just something that we all continued doing until I was faced with the reality that it needs to be spoken about.
As you look back on everything, how has your thinking changed about things like luck, fate, or why you survived?
I'm pretty well asked that question almost every time. And the only answer I can give to that is that somebody up above was watching over us. The fact that my father and my family were reunited in France and liberated is just something of a miracle, and there's very little that we can explain about that.
Did your dad ever talk about what he went through when he was separated from your family?
No, we never knew what he did in Westerbork. He never spoke about it.
You talked about your parents' reaction to going back to Holland. How did you feel about returning to Holland? And did you visit the home that you grew up in?
Yes, I was actually excited. I thought it was a great opportunity for my husband and my children, and that turned out to be true. I actually had a chance to visit the home where I was born and raised in, and one day my husband came to me and he says, "You know what, let's take a ride to Maastricht and see if we can't find the house that you lived in." And on the way, Herb asked me to describe what I remember about that house. And so I gave him a detailed description of what I thought I remembered. And we found the house and we knocked on the door, and this woman answered, and I said that we are members of the Spielman family, and she went, "Oh my gosh, I think I remember your family." And she invited us in and served us some coffee, and after a little talk, she offered for us to take a tour of the house. And when we got back in the car, my husband sat in the car going like this. And he said, "I cannot believe how you described every little room in that house." It was exactly the way it was.
The memories of children. With that, we have a question of, what were your hobbies as a child?
I don't think I had the chance to have hobbies. I was, put in a concentration camp at a very early age, and kids knew how to survive by entertaining each other, and so there weren't any hobbies. But I sure had a lot when I came here.
What was some of the ones that you had when you got here?
I love to read. I like to do handwork. I like to travel. And I love life.
Great responses. Question is one I've always had too. Did your neighbors maintain their promise and keep your family's things?
Yes, they did. My father returned to Holland on the the Mary Queen ship. And no, I'm sorry, it was the Queen Elizabeth. And he went to the house and knocked on their door, and they invited him in. And sure enough, all the crates were there. And he arranged to have them all shipped to the States.
How did you hold on to hope when you and your family were detained?
I don't know the answer to that. I really don't. I mean, we just took one day at a time and lived it as best as we could.
You mentioned that in the camps, you didn't have time, like there was no way for hobbies, but you entertained yourself. What did you do? What did you and your siblings do to kind of distract yourselves or to entertain yourselves?
Well, I remember one instance where we made sort of a line in the dirt, and we took rocks, and we tried to see who can throw the rock the farthest. So we made up our own games to entertain us.
Can you talk more about what you felt when the U.S. troops liberated the camp?
Well, like most people, they opened the gates to our camp, and nobody wanted to leave. They had no idea of where to go, and they were scared. Fortunately, because of my mother's citizenship, we were taken to a place where we were taken care of, like I explained in my talk, and then transported on an American battleship.
You talked a little bit about your experience as arrival. What were those first thoughts that went through your head of arriving in America?
What a beautiful place. And everybody was so warm and welcoming and took care of us. That is something that we hadn't known for over 2.5 years.
Somebody wants to know, can you still speak any German, Dutch, or French?
I cannot speak. I took French in school, but I can't say I speak it. I do understand everything, almost everything in German, and I did become fluent in Dutch, but since I've returned to the States, it's sort of disappeared. If you don't use it, you lose it.
Mm-hmm. All right, one final question for you. What message would you offer to young people today about standing up for themselves?
Do it. If you believe in something, then fight for it. And especially with what's going on today in our country, we need more people to speak out and try to correct things that are going wrong.
Well, I want to thank you again, Hanna, for sharing your story today. For those of you joining us, again, thank you for coming. We will continue our summer survivor speaker series on Friday, August 8th at 1 p.m. with Ron Schwartz, the son of Holocaust survivor Charles Schwartz of blessed memory, who will share his father's story. So thank you again for joining us. Please enjoy your afternoon.
Thank you.